The Graduate Center, as many of you know, is not only a school of arts and sciences, but we're also a forum in the heart of Midtown for a variety of conversations and performances and screenings like tonight's event. To that end, we are presenting over the course of this whole year an initiative called Cultural Capital, the Promise and Price of New York's Creative Economy. And what we're doing is examining different facets of the city's creative economy in a variety of events, performances, screenings, again, like tonight's event. And so we would invite you to visit the website for this new initiative, and please pick up a brochure, which you can find out on the tables in front. So again, I'm just going to quickly introduce our participants and get out of the way so that we can begin the discussion, which will be immediately followed by the screening. So we hope that you'll be able to stay for both segments of the evening. Of course, as you all know, we are very fortunate to have Shari Springer Berman joining us tonight, and she will be in conversation with Jerry Carlson. So Shari, along with her partner, Robert Pulcini, wrote and directed the amazing film, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, American Splendor, which won over 30 awards, including the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance and the Fipresci Award at Cannes. The film was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. Their acclaimed HBO film, Cinema Verite, which starred Diane Lane, the late James Gandolfini, and Tim Robbins, also received numerous accolades. Shari and Robert's award-winning documentaries include Off the Menu, The Last Days of Chassins, and The Young and the Dead. Their most recent film, Girl Most Likely, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. It stars Kristen Wiig, Annette Bening, Matt Dillon, and Darren Criss. And I think they have some very interesting projects in the works, which, if we're lucky, maybe Shari will tell us more about tonight. Film historian Jerry Carlson, who will be the interlocutor for tonight, is a professor of French, film studies, and comparative literature at the Graduate Center and at City College. Jerry is also a producer for CUNY TV and hosts its weekly movie showcase, City Cinematheque. A specialist in narrative theory and the cinema of the French and Spanish-speaking worlds, he has lectured in France, Spain, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and elsewhere. So will you please join me in welcoming Shari Springer Berman and Jerry Carlson.
So, Shari, I thought we'd start with you just in the movies. You came of age and are graduating from college in the mid to late 80s. So were you interested in the movies when you went to college? What were they for you when you were in college? And then what kind of world did you get out of college into? Because it's now 25 years on.
Oh, God. Don't remind me.
No. The rule, no numbers with ladies. I forgot it.
I always loved film, movies. As a little girl, my mom was a big movie buff, and she took me to see movies that were sometimes inappropriate for really good films like Roman Polanski movies, and but maybe I was a little young to see them. But
and look how you turned out.
But she gave me good taste in film. And when I went to college, I did not major in film. I wanted to major in film, but I don't know. I guess I felt that I should. Well, first of all, I was scared that I wouldn't be able to make a living, which is a legitimate fear. But more than that, I wanted to get a general education, a liberal arts education. So I took a few film classes, but I majored in European intellectual history, which also you can't get a job at. So I was doomed either way. But it taught me how to think, and I believe truly that my writing, my work as a director, and everything I do in my life is enriched by having studied philosophy and history and all those liberal arts things. And then when I graduated from college, it was a very exciting time in film. I remember going to see a movie called Stranger Than Paradise, which was a Jim Jarmusch movie. And I had never in my life seen anything. It was like different. It was a completely different kind of film. And I couldn't put my finger on why. I wasn't educated enough as a film goer to understand, like, oh, there were no cuts, there were only dissolves. Like, I didn't know the words, but I knew that I was watching something that was completely different. And it was incredibly exciting. And I was lucky enough to live in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, and there were a lot of great theaters that would show independent films, people like Spike Lee and Stephen Frears and My Beautiful Laundrette, I'm thinking specifically. And God, there were so many there were all these great independent, Todd Haynes and all these amazing independent filmmakers pushing the boundaries, doing things that were so different. Actually, Hollywood was kind of in a really depressing state at that point. There was, I think the films that were coming out it was a time when CAA, which I'm actually represented by now, so if this gets out, I'm very pro-CAA now. But at the time, it was like agents were really the ones who were running the business, and it was very packaged and fake, and it was sort of a reaction to the 70s where it was very artistic. In the 80s, it was really, Hollywood was kind of depressing and not really pushing the envelope. But then there was this whole alternative cinema going on, and it made me want to go to film. I wound up going to graduate school at Columbia for film. It made me want to be a filmmaker. And it made me feel like I could be a filmmaker, because people, it seemed like people were just doing it. They were, they weren't Steven Spielberg. They were just like a guy from Brooklyn, like Spike Lee, who, went to NYU Film School and picked up a camera. So it seemed like you could do it.
Yeah. So some of your first work that, was then shown at festivals or whatever was documentary. So talk about this whole double life you have led. I mean, the documentary impulse and the fiction writing. Some people said, well, I made documentaries because I couldn't make fiction, or those arguments. So what's that relationship for you? What's that been?
Well, basically what happened was Bob, who's my husband and my partner, I met him at Columbia, and we were trying to figure out a way to make a living and work in the film business. And it's kind of a really funny story, but we were working as screenwriters, and we weren't working we were trying to work as screenwriters. We were writing screenplays, and we finally got our first agent. And I don't know, how many people here have tried to get an agent it's like, honestly, the hardest thing I've ever done in this business is try to get my first agent, because there's this weird sort of rule that they don't want to represent you unless you have work, but you can't get work unless you're represented. So there's like catch-22 there, and you don't know how to get around it. But we finally got an agent, and the agent said, why don't you guys come out to LA? I'm going to go out with this script that you wrote, which was it was like the opposite of everything we wound up doing. It was like a Grisham-style thriller, which I've never done subsequently, but he was like, I think we can sell it. So we took like whatever little money we had, and we went to Los Angeles to do meetings, and we wound up we didn't have enough money to stay at a hotel, and Bob found on the internet a bed and breakfast in West Hollywood that was pretty reasonable. So we decided to stay at the bed and breakfast. So we showed up at the bed and breakfast, which was a big pink house in the Hollywood Hills. And this man greets us at the door in a tuxedo. And he has this very affected accent, which sounds sort of like, from an old movie. And he's like, hello, my dear, welcome. And he like invites us in. And he's like, I have some chili from Chasen's. I'm off to work. I'll see you later. It turns out he was a maitre d' at Chasen's, which was one of the world's one of the most sort of famous old Hollywood restaurants. And we would go during the day and pitch this Grisham-style thriller, of which nobody was interested in, and not sell it, and get depressed, and come back to the bed and breakfast at night and listen to this man, Raymond. His name was Raymond Bilboul, which was a perfect name for him. And he would tell us stories about Chasen's and working there, and how every waiter there had been there for like 50 years, and how they, were the Mrs. Freeze, who was a producer's wife, got into a fight with Mrs. Spelling, and Candy Spelling, and this famous person came in, and then he was talking about this old waiter who's been there forever, Tommy Gallagher, who's on oxygen, and he's still trying to wait on people, and his oxygen tank is getting in everybody's way. And he was such a character that literally Bob turned to me and said, "We have to put this guy on film." And I'm like, "We have to put this guy on film." And then he said to us, Chasen's just announced that they're closing after, I guess it was like 50 years, 60 years. And it was just like, okay, this is a crazy opportunity. I knew somebody who wanted to be a producer, who had a little bit of money. I called her from LA. I'm like, I have a movie, we have to make it. We came back to New York. I was still a student at Columbia, so I used the camera, the film camera. We shot this movie on 16 millimeter film, which nobody does anymore. But I took a film camera, which we weren't supposed to take to California, but I was very careful. I didn't check it. It flew cross country in my lap. And we basically made this documentary because the story was so compelling. Right. It wasn't like we had any intention. It was like it had to happen. We had to put it on film. And that's how we got into making documentaries.
And so, it's a film, I saw it many years, it's a wonderful film. And
I rewatched it, and I have to say, and so many of those people are gone, it's really, really heartbreaking, but I love it. I'm really proud
but I
of
mean,
it.
one of the things about the film, and I don't want to talk a lot about a film that people haven't seen, but that you saw the story there. I mean, that each one of these characters bears a kind of story when they appear on camera, and you're really compelled by the backstory of everybody who's passing.
And what we wanted to do, which was really exciting to us, is tell the story of the workers, of the people who work there, and the waiters who were so proud of, of their life work. Where in LA now, waiters, 99.9% of them are out of work actors. These are people who were career waiters. I wasn't as interested in the celebrities, although there were plenty coming and going, including Frank Sinatra. We had to hide from him in the back room. When he showed up, they were like, "You have to clear out. You can't film Mr. Sinatra." So we had to hide in a closet. But that was the reason why we wanted to make it.
Well, then talk about how, because again, this is a particular moment. This is now going back 20 years. So how did that movie get you further along into the indie world? Because it's a movie that had, had its place in the festival world. Talk about a little bit the experience of the festival circuit and indies, and how that was working in those days.
Oh yeah, so it was all about getting your movie seen by people, and that's what happened. The movie got screened all over the world, won a bunch of awards, and got us recognized. It allowed us to sell our first screenplay, because we were still writing screenplays. So it allowed us, people were suddenly interested in what we had, and it wasn't the Grisham. It was a very funky thing that was much more along the lines of what we wound up doing with the screenplay that we sold, which was about the life of Juan Garcia Esquivel, who was the king of space-age bachelor pad music. And he was a real person. He was alive at the time. And it never got made, but we sold it to Fox Searchlight, and it was our first.
How did you come to be writing a screenplay about Latin lounge music for bachelors? It's perhaps not the thing that pops to mind for everyone.
We loved the music. See, one of the things that I guess maybe is appropriate, with Chasen's, works with the idea of Chasen's, is that we like things from the past, and Chasen's was from another era, and Esquivel was music from another time. It was he was forgotten. You guys would mostly recognize the sort of Jetsons music. He wrote these things called wordless vocals, which it was like zoo 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 pow, that Jetson sound. And he was Mexican, and he had a belief in, he believed that music was like a universal language. And so he didn't want there to be words, because that would make it specifically English or French or whatever. So he had these wordless vocals, and he was also an engineer. So he had really interesting, crazy ways of recording. And he was a real handsome, kind of a real character. And so we loved his story. He had a great story, and fell in love with the idea of it, and pitched it, and wrote a script, and got it set up at Fox Searchlight.
And we're still waiting for.
Yeah, and it's never going to happen. But that
never
happens
is a very long time, Shari.
That happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, so then talk to us about how you got from documentary to the first fiction feature film.
So then we wound up making Chasen's, which had a lot of fans. Which, by the way, if anyone's interested, I think you can get it on Netflix or whatever. It's available. So we were, I guess, people were interested in our work, and we had met a film producer named Ted Hope. And anyone who knows anything about the early days of the independent film world, Ted Hope is like a kingpin of the early days of the film world, of the independent film world. He, along with James Seamus, who ran Focus Features up until 2 weeks ago, which is very sad, they started a company called Good Machine, which basically discovered Ang Lee, along with many other people. But, Ang Lee is like, they did his first few films. And Ted did a lot of very adventurous films. And I got a phone call from Ted, who we had met because he had seen Chasen's and liked it. And he said, I have a really crazy project for you guys, but I think you're the perfect people. I think it will mix doc and narrative. And I think you guys could really make it work. The only thing is, it's about a really difficult person, and you have to fly to Cleveland and meet him first to see if he likes you and if you like him. And that was Harvey Picar, and it was American Splendor. And we were terrified. We were like, what do you mean? He's that different? And then he sent us, and Bob remembered Harvey from his Letterman appearances. I had never seen them. And he sent us a bunch of the American Splendor comics. So I really wasn't aware of the American Splendor comics. But he sent us a bunch of Letterman appearances of Harvey Picar, where he was just horrible, fighting with Letterman the whole time, incredibly ornery. And I'm like, oh my God, what are we doing? But we being, doc people, were like, we're going to go out there and check it out. So we went out to Cleveland. And I'll never forget, Harvey recommended a hotel that we stay at. We should have known this was going to be the craziest experience. So Harvey said, you have to stay at this hotel, man. It's real. It's close to where I live. It wasn't really a hotel. It was like a place where people who are getting chemotherapy at the Cleveland Clinic live while they're going to the Cleveland Clinic. And I'm not exaggerating. There were like people on drips everywhere, and Harvey was like, but it's great because Cole Porter wrote Night and Day upstairs in the because he was a music fanatic, in the ballroom. And so we went up, and there was like a defunct ballroom where Cole Porter wrote Night and Day. So already we were so freaked out. We're like, this place is so crazy. I can't believe it. And Harvey's crazy. And then we went out with Harvey and his wife Joyce for I think it was dinner, and they got into a huge fight, like right away. And but I completely fell in love with him. Bob completely fell. We loved each other because we're insane, obviously, and we said, all right, this is. He's like, I love them, man, and we're like, and that was it. We went on the crazy journey of American Splendor together.
And so then how did the script develop from that point? I mean, how did things get put together? Because now you've just met a person who's got a story and...
Right. Well, it was great to meet him. That's where we wound up becoming friends, and Harvey, it's so funny because Harvey would call us. I mean, I'm being completely honest, and Harvey, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, would be honest and agree with this, is he would call every once in a while, but you'd think he would call because he wanted to know how we were writing, or he'd call and be like, man, I'm really worried, I really need the bread. Tell me you're gonna make this movie, you know? Like, he was just worried about making money. That's all he cared about. So anyway, we knew that we needed Harvey to be, the real Harvey Pekar, to be a part of the film.
Right.
And I don't know, we just sort of, we took all of his comics and went through them and found, because he wrote these autobiographical comics, if people don't know, the opposite of Marvel and DC, real quotidian, everyday, you know, waiting online at the supermarket and standing behind somebody who like has coupons and him being like, I mean, that was what he would write about. And it was revolutionary. And he became friends with R. Crumb in Cleveland, and Crumb would draw them for him. So we just somehow found a way of weaving together his stories to tell his story, spend time talking to him, spend time talking to Joyce.
Right.
The script was pretty scripted. People think, I mean, obviously there's little Doc moments in it that we wrote what we thought Harvey would say, and I have to say he's pretty easy to predict because he said pretty close to what I would think. It was definitely like, I would never make a movie like that now because I know too much. I know too much about, you know, planning and making feature films. We kind of went in a little ignorant, but it opened us up to taking a lot of risks that I guess worked, you know. It also was talk about like New York and making films. It was a really insane time. Our first day of casting on American Splendor was on September 10th, 2001 in Lower Manhattan. Our office was on Canal and Varick with a huge window that had a view of the World Trade Center. So that was our first day of casting. And I mean, then the world changed the next day. And we almost didn't make the film. We had a meeting like, do we even want to make films? You know, we really thought it through and with Ted. And we were like, if we're going to make any film, this is a film we should make. So, you know, it was really tough. We went to Cleveland, and New York was still a disaster area. Right. And I grew up in New York. It's my hometown. I felt horrible. I felt like I was leaving the ship. It was sinking. But there was something about the insanity of that time that made you want to take risks. It made you want to sort of jump off a cliff and do something that you might not do under normal circumstances. So,
well, talk about the casting of the film.
Well, it's interesting because Paul Giamatti actually came in and auditioned for us, and it was done. He came in and he did it, and it was like, this is our guy. And HBO will deny this to this day because they have a long-standing relationship with Paul. But they didn't want us to cast him. They said they wanted a bigger name. And again, talk about A, being ignorant, and B, being this crazy post-9/11 moment. Bob and I quit. We were like, well, if we can't cast, you're only giving us like we only had $1.5 million to make the film, which was really, crazy. And we're like, you're only giving us that amount of money, and if we can't cast who we want, then we quit. And we quit for about 6 hours, 7 hours. But like now, I would never do that because they would be like, good luck, we're gonna hire another director. But we just were bold and stupid and ignorant and young, and we quit. And then Ted called us about 6 hours later and said, all right, you can cast Paul Giamatti. And that was the best decision ever because, and Paul's still a very dear friend, and he's an incredible actor. And then Hope, it was funny, Hope originally didn't want to do it. We kept asking about her, Hope Davis, and then she finally, I think she didn't want to leave New York. I mean, we talked about it. She wasn't like she didn't want to go to Cleveland under the circumstances, and then she finally was like, all right. And she kind of relented to doing it. And again, she was so perfect. We were really lucky to have her.
Well, one of the things, we're going to get to New York very, very soon, and New York and Shari, but it's very interesting to see this as the first feature film, knowing your documentary background and all of that, because you're not somebody who knew Cleveland before you made this film.
No, not at all.
But one of the things that I find and admire through your films is that the relationship between the characters and the place where they are is always very, very strong. That these are not characters that kind of exist in abstraction in any environment. They very concretely do that. So how was it directing the film and kind of getting that relationship? I mean, was that something?
Well, we had the greatest ambassador to Cleveland in the world, which was Harvey Pekar. I mean, he was like the mayor of Cleveland. Everybody loved him. He lived there his whole life. He knew every detail about it. I mean, down to the point that he called me up and he said, I'm really glad you cast Paul Giamatti because he is from Connecticut. Paul grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. His father was A. Bartlett Giamatti, who was the president of Yale. He said that the original...
Not working class Cleveland.
No, not working class Cleveland. The people who founded... that the original settlers in Cleveland came from Connecticut. And so the Cleveland accent is related to a Connecticut accent.
I have learned something new.
I didn't know that either, and certainly Paul didn't know that. But that's, Harvey's knowledge. He was a brilliant man, one of the most well-read people. Never went to college, but one of the most well-read people I've ever met. Truly a working-class intellectual. And so he was our ambassador to Cleveland, and we spent time there and soaked up the culture. And it has a lot of character, Cleveland. It's not the kind of place that... It's not a sort of anonymous New York American city. It's a lot of character.
We were talking a little bit earlier today before we got on stage, about working with the cinematographer that you had on that film, and just the whole notion that people thought you had to construct these sets to make them so authentic.
Right. Yeah.
Talk about that a little.
HBO sent us, when we sent our dailies, when you shoot a film, you always have to send the dailies, which is like what you shot for the day, to the studio or the producers, and you get feedback, which is sometimes frightening. And we got feedback after the first day, like, oh, we love what they did to the walls, and when he's walking down the street in Cleveland, the walls are so orange, and there's this like sign that you guys put up, and I was like, you're $1.5 million, you think we like painted the walls in Cleveland and put up signs? This is Cleveland. Like, it comes art directed. So we were lucky. I mean, one of the keys, I think, is shooting in a place that has a lot of personality, and not just an anonymous American city. I'm not as interested in making films like that.
Yeah, I think that's clear across the trajectory of all your films, because they all have that personality of place and that investment. So let's get you to New York, because presumably our subject, since you are a New York-based filmmaker who's made a number of films here, just remind people how many films you've made here and what they were.
I've made 5. Oh no, in New York I've made 5 films, 5 feature films in total. The ones I made in New York, the first one I made in New York was The Nanny Diaries. then I made The Extra Man, and then I made this film, my new film, Girl Most Likely, my newest film. And I am in the process of casting and hopefully in January making another film in New York City set in Lower East Side.
Good. So what is it that you like about making movies in your own town? In terms, from every kind of level, I mean, just from being able to be in your town to what you think you get on the screen by being in a place you're so closely associated with.
Well, I think I like when the location you're shooting at is sort of a character in the film. And New York is an incredible character. What other place is a better character than New York City? So to me, and as being a New Yorker, having grown up in New York, still living in New York, it's a place I know really, really well. And I like showing all different sides of it. I mean, The Nanny Diaries was about the Upper East Side, wealthy, Park Avenue, New York. So Bob and I live on the Upper West Side, would walk, before we did the movie, we would just go for long walks up and down Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue, Madison Avenue. We'd go into Bergdorf Goodman and just look at the women and be like, oh my God, look, they're carrying their little dogs with them. They really do that. And, go have lunch at the place where the ladies at lunch and just sort of observe it. I think it comes from the documentarian in us. We would just soak it up and go watch the kids getting picked up from the private schools in the cars being sent, the car services and the SUVs waiting to pick the kids up from the private schools, and really immersed ourselves. I was even so excited once I went to one of these ladies at lunch place, and I actually got introduced to the lion lady who got all that plastic surgery. And I asked her to be in the film, and she said no. She turned me down. So to me, it's like being able to completely immerse yourself in a world. When I make a film, I'm living in that world for a good year, at least.
Right.
And New York is a world I like to immerse myself in.
Well, let's talk about the other New York, which is the New York of the movies made by other people. Are there some New York movies that really, before you were making your New York movies, it meant a lot to you? I mean, the kinds of filmmakers who dealt with New York.
Well, the obvious name is Woody Allen, and I mean, he had a very unique, very specific view of New York. And it's so interesting because I think people around the world, because he is so popular around the world, think, that all of New York is Woody Allen's New York. But God, did he do a good job of, of portraying that part of New York. So he meant a great deal to me. But also, I mean, someone like Spike Lee, I mean, Do the Right Thing, I thought was an incredibly exciting, and having grown up, I actually grew up in Brooklyn, I thought that was an incredible view of a whole other side of New York. Oh my God, I mean, I'm totally blanking on great...
Sidney Lumet.
Oh, Sidney Lumet, of course, who I said I'm incredibly inspired by. He made probably the ultimate New York movies, I think. There's so many. I mean, there's been so many great representations of New York that, and the thing that's incredible about New York is such a change. It changes so much. I feel like every generation has their New York, and then it changes, and then the younger generation has their New York, and then the movie that I'm hoping to make is based on a book, 10,000 Saints. And it takes place in 1988. It takes place in this one year on St. Mark's Place and the Lower East Side. And that's my New York. That was my coming of age in New York period of time when I was living in New York and young. And So it was like my chance to put my New York into a movie. So it never gets, I mean, I love Edith Wharton, she's like one of my favorite writers, and
Martin Scorsese shares your opinion. as
yeah,
well know.
I mean, I actually, that was I don't know if it quite captured the book, but it was still like, she had her New York, and so it's never going to be used up. Like New York City will be a subject of film and literature and theater forever, I think.
No, I agree with you. And if I can share just one anecdote, I love The French Connection. It's one of my films, and it's when I was in college. And so when I say, no, Popeye Doyle dressed as Santa Claus kicking a drug dealer in a lot. Now that's my New York.
Well, it's funny because Shaft, that's funny.
Yeah.
Shaft, whenever I watch the opening credits of Shaft, I'm like, that's what New York City looked like when I was a little girl. It's like really bleak, and it's depressing and dirty, and it's like this weird, like New York was bankrupt 70s New York, but that was like my little girl. So I have like a weird affection for this horrible, depressing New York that is part of Shaft.
And American movie history.
Midnight Cowboy, another incredible. I mean, you could just keep thinking, and there's so many.
Okay. Let me just change the subject in a slightly different direction, and we'll get to the extra man and kind of setting it up for people. But before that, I mean, you and your husband, who's also your work partner, take double credit for your film. So for people who may not have
Or
been,
double blame.
yeah, well it's half empty, half full. So how does that kind of work from soup to nuts? That two people are doing this.
It's becoming more common. When we started, it was really not done. We met at film school and started working together, so we sort of created a division of labor from day one. It's funny because the DGA, the Directors Guild, would not allow there to be two directors on a film. We did American Splendor non-DGA, so we were able, once we did join the DGA, they made an exception to allow us to be a team. One of the few exceptions. The Coen brothers, who basically co-direct their movies, had to, because they were, before that, one takes the directing credit and one takes the producing credit, because the DGA, I don't know if they take both now, co-directing credit, because the DGA was so rigid about it, and now it's really opened up, and there's a lot of directing teams, a lot more directing teams. Basically, we write together, but I was saying we do not sit together at the computer and write together. We would be divorced many years ago if we had done that. We each sort of take a turn writing a draft. One person starts, says, I feel like I can take this on, and I'll write this first draft, and then the other person takes it and says, oh, this is good, this is bad, whatever. When we are actually making the movie, I'm more producerially inclined, so I do a lot of that stuff. Bob works more with the camera. He's more visual, so he'll go and spend a lot of time shot listing with the cinematographer, whereas I used to be a casting director for a little while, so I'm always in the casting sessions. I'm very intimately involved in the casting, and then also I'm the one who really works more directly with the actors. We used to both give notes to the actors, and it was a little sloppy. Sometimes we gave conflicting notes. So now I'm usually the one who speaks directly to the actors, and if Bob wants something, he'll tell me and say, can you get Annette Bening to, blah, blah, or can you get some. In post, this is the most interesting thing. Bob is an editor, and Bob has edited every single one of our movies, although he had a partner on Cinema Verite, so he co-edited. I always, at that point, when Bob becomes the editor, I become his boss. It's my favorite part when I actually become, because I'm the director still and he works for me. And I'd say I'd probably fire him once a film, you know, for about a day. I'm like, we get into a fight and I'm like, that's it, you're fired. And then we, you know, rehire him. So that's basically the way it goes.
Okay. Well, let's now move on to setting up what the audience is about to see. So how did you come to choose this particular project, the Extra Man? How did this get on your radar, get developed, and come to be?
It's funny. It's another crazy. Like, things are always crazy stories how they happen. Our manager sent us a book by this wonderful writer, Jonathan Ames, who's based in Brooklyn. He did a television show. This was before the TV show, but you might know him. He had an HBO series called, what was his series? Bored to Death. Thank you. He had an HBO series, Bored to Death. But he's a wonderful writer. And someone sent us a book to read. And they said they want to develop this into a movie. And it was The Extra Man. Bob read it first. And he was like laughing the whole time. And he's like, this is so fantastic. I love this book. You have to read it. I said, all right, well, if you love it that much, I'm interested. Monday he calls, and he calls the manager, and the manager's like, oh my God, that book that I sent you the wrong book. Don't read it. And Bob's like, too late. I read it, and I love it. And so we then pursued Jonathan, who actually, like, by weird, 6 degrees of separation, his best friend was someone who was working with Harvey Pekar on a book called The Quitter. He's a graphic artist and a cartoonist,
right.
And he was working with Harvey. So we had that in common, and we met Jonathan, and we told him that we want to do it, and he was excited about it. And Jonathan and Bob and I sort of worked on the script together. And what really appealed to us about it is it's a semi-autobiographical story for Jonathan, which a lot of his stuff is. He has a very crazy life, and he has no shame in telling you the most personal things, which is incredible. But it was like a story about New York that I felt like I'd never seen, about these sort of invisible people that like come to New York to be something, to be a movie star, to be a playwright, to be an artist, and it doesn't happen for them, but they stay here and they cling to culture. They cling to whatever piece of culture they can have, and they have these great, like, these tiny studio apartments that they're paying like $200 a month for, and I had a great uncle like that, and I just felt like I'd never seen these people on screen,
right.
These New Yorkers represented, and the main character, Henry Harrison, who we were incredibly lucky to get the great Kevin Kline to play, is just, in my opinion, a great New York character.
Absolutely.
I just, someone I really wanted to put on film.
And when you were, reading the book or then doing the script, were you thinking Kevin Kline?
The first meeting we had with Jonathan, we were like, who do you see playing Henry Harrison? And he said, Kevin Kline. And we were like, Kevin Kline. He was our first choice, and his nickname in the business, by the way, is Kevin D. Kline, because he does very little work of film. He does a lot of theater.
Yeah.
So, I was told by my representatives, like, you can't count on getting Kevin Kline. So we were incredibly lucky. And the first time we met with Kevin to discuss the character, he picked the place, which was this weird restaurant on the Upper East Side. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was like a very like sort of blue-haired ladies at lunch restaurant. And Kevin showed up in a sort of ratty suit. He showed up and he was completely in character. He showed up fully in character as Henry Harrison and started quoting Shakespeare really loudly, like basically did a whole monologue in the middle of the restaurant. And it was, he so embodied the character. There was a lot of method acting going on in this movie, which was amazing, but also very difficult because it was a low-budget movie. So when Kevin, there's a scene where he comes into, his back goes out and they carry him into his apartment, and the prior scene, they were on the beach. But you never shoot anything in sequence in a thing. So the prior scene we shot was like something, I don't know what, but it was certainly not the beach scene. And Kevin's like, I can't shoot. We're like, are you ready to shoot? He took a very long time doing it. He's like, no, I can't shoot. I'm not ready. And we were like, what's the matter, Kevin? The time is, are we okay?
Yeah.
Time is running out. You know, what's going on? And he's like, I need sand in my shoes. And we're like, Kevin, what do you mean? And he's like, I was at the beach in the prior scene. I need sand in my shoes. They always, and we're like, but Kevin, nobody will see the sand. And he's like, but I'll know if it's there. And that's the only way I can possibly do this role. So we had to send like a intern to Riverside Park, you know, to go to like the sandbox and bring back at night and steal sand for Kevin's shoes. And we had the great, I mean, there was, there's a woman named Vivian Cudlip in the movie who's like the grande dame. That Kevin is a walker in the movie, who takes this woman, this society woman out. And we got this one, the amazing theater and film actress, a legend, Marion Seldes, who I was in awe of just spending time with her. And Marion was Kevin's teacher at Juilliard. So Marion and Kevin had a long history, but unfortunately in this movie they only had one scene together, and that one scene Marion was supposed to be, I'm going to ruin something, but it's not that big, is supposed to be dead. Okay, so it's the day we're shooting it. Marion's in a coffin, Kevin's standing over her, and I hear this conversation, and Kevin says, Marion, I want to see you try to steal the scene now. and Marion looks at him and says, you know I will, Kevin.
So I think I've been getting signals from the house manager.
Done.
Yeah, we've come to an end here, but I think it's a great ending to come to, because everybody's going to be looking forward to that scene. Right? And
you'll tell us if Marion steals it.
Yeah, absolutely the case. So let's all thank Shari for coming and joining us here.